Well, as Christmas approaches, many of us think about giving or receiving poinsettias for Christmas. However, there are a lot of plants that make really great gifts for Christmas. And since we had such a fun time visiting the Crystal Bridge and seeing all of their tropical plants last week, I thought this week we'd talk a little bit about a tropical plant that is really fun to grow, and that is the bromeliad. Now, the bromeliad family is a huge family. It has over 50 genera and over 2,500 species in it, and all of them except for one are native to the Americas, either the southern United States, Central America, or South America. There are two bromeliads that are pretty common to us, and they are examples of two types of bromeliads that there are. And one of them is the pineapple, and it's an example of a terrestrial bromeliad, a bromeliad that grows in the ground and has roots that actually provide the plant with both nutrients and water. And another bromeliad that's pretty common to us is Spanish moss. Now here, this Spanish moss is actually dead. It's harvested a lot to use in flower arranging and also as packing, but Spanish moss is an example of an epiphytic bromeliad. An epiphytic bromeliad is one that grows usually in trees, and its roots only provide an anchor for it. They don't provide the plant with any nutrients or water. The epiphytes actually receive all of their water from the air, either from rainfall or from being in a cloud forest in the tropics. And one note on these, they're not a parasite, they're just an epiphytic plant, so remember that. Now, bromeliads are pretty easy to grow. They aren't too awfully picky. You need to have a spot where you can grow them in bright to filtered light. Most of them like a fairly bright light. Now, these can vary with the species. In general, the species that have stiffer leaves actually like brighter light. And this is an example of one here. This is an Echmea, and it has stiffer leaves. And it will like bright filtered light. However, the species that have the softer leaves, like this Vreesia, can take a little less light. Also, the temperature is pretty wide range. The minimum temperature for a lot of bromeliads is about 40 to 45 degrees, and it can range clear up to 100 that they can actually live in 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, again, the stiffer leaved varieties can take lower temperatures. This is a general rule of about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, while the softer leaved varieties need about 60 degrees as their minimum temperature. So if you think about minimum temperatures with these, it will help you in taking care of your bromeliads. They also like a very well-drained soil. Even the ones that have a terrestrial habit to them need a soil that will wet and then drain very quickly. They don't like to have wet roots. Now, there are several types of bromeliads out there, and today I'm going to show you just a few of the very common ones. And one that most of us can find in our garden centers and in our florist shops is the silver vase or urn plant. This is Echmea fasciata, and you can see here how it gets its name. It's basically cupped leaves with a vase down in the middle, and most of the time when we get this as a gift or when we buy it, you'll see an inflorescence coming out the center of the plant. Now, this is not the actual flower. This is actually a flower stalk and bracts, and the actual flowers are down inside here, and those will bloom. Now, the actual flowers of this plant will bloom, and they'll actually be a purple to bluish color and last for 1 or 2 days and then die, but you'll see a succession of flowers blooming. However, this entire flower stalk can actually be on the plant for about 3 to 4 months. So it actually looks like it's blooming, because most of us think of this as being the flower and the showy part, for 3 months. So you have a nice long bloom time on this. This plant also shows an example of what most bromeliads' habit is like. Their leaves are in a rosette around the center, and so you can see how they all come together here, with some of the plants having a cup in the middle, and some of them wouldn't necessarily have this cup that held water. Now, that's another thing to think about with the Echmeas. A lot of times you'll receive instructions that you should keep the cup in the middle full of water, but you don't have to water the roots. You actually need to water both, And during the winter time, when the temperatures are cooler, it's a good idea to let this cup actually dry out. So put maybe an inch of water in there and let that dry out completely before putting more water in. And this is important with most bromeliads. During the winter months, when temperatures are colder and they get less light, hold back on the water a little bit. Also with this plant, I would like to show you here, you can see that we've got a really well-drained soil mix, and you can actually plant these in a plastic or in a clay container. Both of them have their pluses and minuses. The plastic can stay moist a little bit longer. You don't have any salt buildup with it, which you can get some salt buildup with your clay container. However, you notice here that this container is very light, and we've got a pretty heavy plant up here on top. And if we have this filled with water, it's even heavier, and this makes it very unstable. So for your silver vase or urn plant, you might want to repot it in a clay container, and you'll get a better, more stable plant that way. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, I can show you here. I've got a silver vase that's older here, and you might have heard this. Once this blooms, it won't bloom again. This will never bloom again. And what happens is this plant will start to send off side shoots or pups. And here we've got one that once upon a time we had a plant in the center, and now we've got all of these side shoots that have come off. Now each of these will send up a flower and bloom, and over time, maybe the course of 3 or 4 years, our middle plant will actually die down. So you could remove those leaves. Now you could either leave your plant in a pot like this, and you could have multiple plants in a pot, or you could actually remove them. And here we've got a very small pup. We could just break this off gently. You can see where it's attached here. And we could actually pot this up at a new pot and grow this on, and we'd have basically the same look that we would get here. Now Ichneas basically bloom the second year, so it takes about 2 years for them to bloom. Now this one here, this is another type of Ichneia. This is royal wine, and you can see how you can get quite a bit of differentiation with the foliage, texture, and also the color. This is a very pretty plant. It's got some nice red in it, and that would be a pretty addition to a Christmas type setting. Well, another plant that is really pretty and easy to grow like the Ichneia is the Norwegilia. You'll have to forgive me on some of these pronunciations because I'm not very good at that, but this is another bromeliad that is, again, pretty easy to take care of. It takes those lower temperatures of 45 degrees, and the nice thing about this is that right before it blooms and after, all of the leaves that are around the bloom actually turn this bright red color, and many of the different species in this genera actually do this. They'll turn bright red, and so you have a really nice show during the time that it's blooming. This takes basically the same kind of care that our Ichneia does. We need bright filtered light, and you just need to water it when it starts to dry out. Keep it a little drier in the wintertime, and during the summer you can actually fertilize the soil with a fertilizer that's high in potassium. Now, as we move on, we're getting to some bromeliads that are a little bit harder to take care of, but they are very pretty. And this is the Vriesia. This particular one is also known as flaming sword, and you can see why it gets that name, because the flower in the center looks like a sword coming out here and turns this bright red. The other nice thing about this is it has really cool foliage. It kind of looks striped here and looks like very much like something that came out of the jungle. Now this plant needs a warmer winter temperature. It actually needs to have 60 degrees Fahrenheit or more, and you don't want to put water in the cup in this, especially in the wintertime, because that will cause it to rot. You need to fertilize this one at the soil, and again, you want to keep it in a little less light than what you keep the other two. You still need some bright light, but not quite as bright as what we would put our urn plant in. Now the final bromeliad that I wanted to talk about today is one of my favorites. It's a really fun plant. And this is, we see these a lot as air plants, and this one is totally epiphytic. It grows in trees, and you can see we've got it here nestled into some actual Spanish moss. But I want to show you on this. This is called a tillandsia, and right here you can see how it looks kind of fuzzy. These are actually shield-like scales, and that is how the plant actually collects water. Those scales will trap water behind them, and that's how it gets its water and nutrients from the air. It can get nutrients by dust falling on this and getting trapped in those little scales, and that's how it does it. So what this needs is a very well-drained area. That's why we can't pot them, because they're used to getting drenched and then drying out very fast. So what you need to do with these is actually attach them to bark. This is in a small pot, and I probably would take it out of here and attach it onto a piece of bark just in case this might want to hold some water. And then what you want to do is just mist that. And you just mist it daily, and then have it in an area where it's got good air circulation and it can dry out. Now the tillandsias also need really bright light. So you want to have them where they get a lot of light, a lot of filtered sunlight, and they've got good air circulation and can dry out. But they can actually live for you for several years, and they'll actually bloom after about 3 years if their cultural requirements are met. Now to fertilize these in the summertime, you take a very dilute fertilizer solution and put that into your water about every month or so. Just mix that with a fertilizer solution and you can keep these going. And these are just a few of the bromeliads that make great gifts or can be fun plants for you to just play around on your own. So you might try picking up a bromeliad for your own home. There's actually a fun project with bromeliads that you can do with some of that compost that you usually throw in the compost pile. You can actually start pineapples from the tops of those pineapples that you're putting in your fruit compost. And you basically just need to cut the top off. About a ½ inch down from the bottom of the leaves. And we want to let that sit for a few days. And you want to remove all this excess flesh that you see here on the side. And you may have to let it sit for a couple of days and then take this off. And you'll want to let this cure for about 5 days total. And after you've done that, what you'll end up with here is the top with the leaves, and you can see how I've removed all that flesh. And then I've got actually leaves here. What I want to do is take these leaf scales off, and you can take a few of the bottom leaf scales off, about 20 or so, just remove those, and what you'll see down here, you'll see starts of a little bit of roots starting in there. And the reason that we let this cure for about 5 days is that we want that to kind of seal over so that we don't get any infection in there, and that's also why we remove that extra pineapple flesh from around there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this top and we're going to pot it up in a pot. Now the potting soil that you use, either 1 part peat to 1 part sand, or what you can do is actually amend a peat-based potting soil mix, 2 parts of that to 1 part perlite. You need to have something that's very well drained because our pineapple, again, needs that good drainage. Then what we want to do is we just want to plant our pineapple top down in that, just to the base of where we've taken these leaves off. We don't want to come up on the leaves any further, just right there to that ring. And we'll just firm that in there really well. Make sure it's in there. And then what you want to do is water this in. Now you want to set this where it can get some very bright light, but not direct sunlight, but just about as bright as it can get without being direct sun. And you'll only water it when the soil starts to dry out. Now it can actually take 6 to 8 weeks for roots to start to develop, so don't give up on it if you don't see it rooting right away. But also be sure not to water it too awfully much, because you can actually cause rot if you get it watered before those roots get established. Now once those roots have established, you can just let it grow on there. You can leave it in that pot for several months until it fills that pot with roots. And then you'll want to actually pot it up into maybe a 1-gallon size container. And I've got a couple here that you can see. One of our ambassadors, Mac, actually potted these up earlier and they started to grow. And when you see some new growth on the top, that's an indicator that you can go ahead and pot that up into a bigger pot. And you can tell the new growth because you can see here that the leaves are actually quite a bit lighter green than what was on our pineapple to begin with. So we can see it's growing. Then, again, we need to place this in an area with some bright light, and we'll want to start fertilizing it about every third watering with a dilute fertilizer that has high potassium in it. We want to make sure that it gets good sun, and in the summertime you can actually move it out onto the patio where it gets full sun. It needs about 6 hours or more a day. You'll want to make sure not to let it stay out there when it gets too cold. But you can actually grow your pineapple, sizing it up to about a 5-gallon size. Now it's going to take about 3 years before it wants to even think about blooming, so be patient with it, but you might get a crop of pineapples off of your own plants that you started at home.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.